No, this isn't another electronic air blower review. I was tempted to respond to the uproar a day after my last video on this topic, and I'm talking about Nikon's acquisition of RED, the cinema camera company, but decided to wait until the dust settled. Or in at least one disturbing, or should I say disturbed case that I saw on YouTube, spittle. But more than anything, I wanted to investigate a bit more and report. And yes, as per the title, there'll be some more editorializing, maybe even some feather ruffling. So hang on to your hats. Hi, Ray here. Unhinged is the word I used in a response video I made during the height of the Nikon is dead narrative, pushed by people who are old enough to know better. A couple of years back, I won't mention names, but the usual suspects have found a new reason to bash Nikon. Not to mention an army of instant internet experts. Speaking as someone who was used and made a living as a photographer, in most part with Nikon camera systems for decades, yeah, what's with these people? I'm asking the guy who was so deranged by this announcement that his lips were curled back over his teeth like a hydrophobia victim as he tried to climb through his camera lens and grab his audience by the collar. Seriously, calm down. It's an industry merger. Nikon didn't invade your basement fortress. In fact, they haven't done anything yet. As far as major company changes at RED, and certainly not camera releases, that'll take quite a while, I think. Before I continue, let's do a recap. RED sued Nikon in 2022, claiming Nikon copied its data compression technology in a firmware update for the Z9 camera. Nikon responded. Less than a year ago, RED's lawsuit was dismissed, or perhaps quietly dropped, in a California court. We didn't know exactly what the details were. Maybe disagreement? I made videos commenting on those developments, but REDCODE RAW remains a phenomenal innovation, as does Nikon Zen RAW, developed by Tico RAW. But here, I've been wondering, when it comes to potential cross-pollination between RED and existing Nikon Z cameras, is it possible that REDCODE RAW could come to the existing hybrids? I'm particularly interested because you can edit REDCODE in Final Cut Pro, something that, to my knowledge, is not possible with NRAW. You need to use DaVinci Resolve to edit NRAW. So I've avoided that codec. Well, I'm really avoiding learning Resolve, but I really would love to have access to REDCODE in my Z8 and Z9 especially. Would that be possible with a firmware update? I don't know. But what a windfall that would be. Now, allow me a personal anecdote which I think has relevance here. In the 70s, I was working in the bicycle industry when Japanese bikes started to muscle in on my favorite marques, the hand-built English and European beauties like Hetchens, Claude Butler, Bob Jackson, Colnago, Peugeot. So I was dismissive at first. I say dismissive, not rabidly antagonistic. But the more I saw and the more Japanese bikes I sold to customers, mainly because they were so competitively priced, my prejudice began to, well, it was undermined by reality. After I sold my prized French-made Jetan, fitted mostly with Italian components, I ended up riding a Japanese Bridgestone for a while, loaned to me by the owners of Nippon Cycle, a store I landed a job at, after I failed to become a professional alpinist and poet. And then, still cash-strapped, I built up a touring bike around a used Nishiki frame built in the famous Kawamura factory. Again, a bit of a Heinz 57 with Japanese, Italian, Belgian, English, and some American-made parts. The US company Phil Woods was pioneering seal-bearing components, like hubs. I still have this bike, 46 years later, as I built it. It's a beautiful machine that's carried me on so many amazing journeys. Before I leave this subject, as a cyclist, I used Oakley cycling glasses. Oakley, as you may know, was the company on which RED's CEO, Jim Jannard, built his fortune. And the company also sells a whole line of cycling clothing and helmets. But I want to leave the butthurt Nikon haters behind, and if you'll allow, talk about my life as a filmmaker. Well, I don't have one to share. I want to make that clear from the get-go. I'm not a filmmaker. Even though I made my first film, shot on 8mm Kodachrome film 56 years ago, and I'll try to get that to you sometime soon, even though I know it won't get many views. It's something that I've actually had in the works for 6 years now. So aside from that teenage lark and these YouTube videos, these obviously aren't movies, really, I've never made a film. Okay, so what I will call myself is a photographer who dabbles in amateur video production. I'm not about to put DOP after my name anytime soon. So I said in my last piece on this subject that I started to get serious about video about a decade ago. But checking, it's actually been more than 15 years. And I can credit YouTube for encouraging that renewed interest in moving pictures, because I uploaded some 480p videos, one of which has accrued over 700,000 views. Not as much competition back then. But I'd have to say it was my acquisition of a Nikon D7000 that opened my eyes to the possibilities of digital videography. I've dabbled with camcorders before, but that doesn't really count. I was vaguely aware that Sony, Panasonic, and Canon were decent options, but my busy still photography business meant that video had pretty much passed me by, analog and digital at that point. So it was the development of hybrid digital cameras that more or less caught my attention in this way. And wasn't it the Nikon D90 that first brought video to DSLR? It was the first Nikon camera to use an X-speed processor that incorporated a 720p motion JPEG video encoder. More on that in a moment. The D7000 was the successor to the D90 with the second generation X-speed processor. I should add I was still shooting and scanning a fair amount of film, mostly medium format. Okay, so the D7000 was my aha moment. As I say, X-speed 2 and 1080p, and I was smitten. That's when I started investing in other video gear, a decent mic, fluid damp tripod head, etc. When it came to lighting, I often used the modeling lights from my studio strobes, some ancient tungsten lights I had and still have hanging around, and uploading the results to YouTube, most often at 720p. For those unfamiliar with the D90, D7000, and other Nikon cameras of that era, seems funny to call it an era, it was less than 2 decades ago. But I understand that's the dawn of time for the guys losing their minds over the foreign takeover of RED. To us old potato heads, it's the blink of an eye, and digital cinema is still an infant. So maybe that explains some of the infantile behavior. However, infancy can and is, in the realm of human learning, a time of accelerated development. The brain of a child is incredibly plastic. What I think I'm getting at is these mergers of technology like the Nikon-RED amalgamation, and that's what it is, an amalgamation, are like synapses firing in unison and processing, if you will, accumulated learning. Again, I don't want to get out of my depth here. I'm not a neuroscientist or a silicon chip designer. So this event is not so much a hostile takeover. It's obviously not, but it's a collaboration, and I hope that's what it turns out to be, an incredible positive development that could pay great dividends, not just financial, even though that's an essential ingredient as far as driving innovation and survival. I'm of the opinion that Z mount is a very important part of the picture, so to speak. Will it mean RF mount goes away? Well, I don't know for sure, but the grapevine seems to indicate it'll still be an option along with all the others. But would that be bad if a RED camera sported the Z mount and it made for better camera lenses and expanded imaging possibilities? From what I've seen since March 7, a lot of the reaction has been based on, as I inferred, tribal prejudice and a profound ignorance of Nikon history, corporate structure, finances, and existing areas of expertise and products. Yes, Nikon do make binoculars and medical devices and microscopes, ophthalmic lenses, measurement instruments, and semiconductor lithography systems used to create microchips. Those things that we rely on every day to talk and text on our phones, use our computers, and of course cameras. And the best damn potatoes on the market. Okay, Idaho produces a pretty good spud as well. And I don't want to start a YouTuber war. Pun intended. Okay, I suspect this is going to get pegged as an old man rant. And a lot of these bent out of shape types, I suspect ageism is a factor. Not Nikon's 106-year heritage. The Nippon Kogaku Tokyo KK Corporation was formed out of a merger between 3 optical companies in 1917. That doesn't equal experience, evidently. Nor my 6+ decades around cameras. I'm guessing it just means we're old and irrelevant. Nikon is for old farts. You run into that sentiment on social media all the time. Oh, and allow me to respond to the guy who recently commented that I must have Alzheimer's. Well, it's not worth a response, really, other than a block. I'm not the least bit interested in countering these uninformed, ahistorical views because they carry no weight outside of YouTube or wherever they're deposited. And that's not why I record these editorials, really. I'd rather end off by saying I've seen some really positive and thoughtful responses from other Gen Z and millennial cinema camera users, if I can go on their youthful looks. People who don't have their knickers in a twist and their faces distorted into hysterical grimaces of hate. I'm betting these are the people who are going to take advantage of whatever positive developments come out of Nikon's strategic move into the cinema space. And whatever the result, they're going to do good work. This is not going to be all peaches and cream. There'll be a lot of work ahead, I think. And it's been said, maybe correctly, that Nikon and RED's culture is worlds apart. Not just that it hails from opposite sides of the Pacific. I'll talk later on where it's exactly on the same page. And it doesn't mean that competition just disappears. For whatever reason, Nikon didn't build on the early innovation in the hybrid video space. Canon did, of course Sony, and I think that was a strategic mistake on Nikon's part that they've paid for. As for me, I stuck with Nikon. I wasn't making Hollywood films, and I should say here that as important as Hollywood studios have been to the world of cinema art, Hollywood has been a melting pot of talent from around the world, as in the rest of American society, I think. In a neglected chat, I told the tale of my meeting with a Hollywood legend, Robert Easton, and his friendship with English scriptwriter Aldous Huxley. Check it out. It needs some love. And if we're going to be fair, so-called foreign film from UK studios, France, Italy, all over Europe, India, and Canada has a few standouts. Denis Arcand, Adam Agoyan, James Cameron, of course, Ivan Reitman, the great Norman Jewison. And I have to mention Japan and Akira Kurosawa in particular, who created epics like Ran and Dersu Uzala, the latter a Japanese-Russian collaboration. One of mine and Amanda's first dates was a double bill of those movies. Man, that was a lot of popcorn. But back to me and my hybrid cameras. Circa 2012, I was excited to move into full frame with the D600 and then D800. And as I said in a recent video, the files from those cameras are beautiful. I still use some of them. The D800 used XSpeed 3, the first processor to offer uncompressed video output, 8-bit 422 over HDMI. And before I forget about the D90, some filmmakers thought the look they got from the D90 was good enough to make films with. I'm thinking of the feature film Reverie, made with the D90 in 2006, I think it was. It's been pretty hilarious to see purported filmmakers, guys who often rant about art and storytelling, not the camera being the most important to filmmaking, getting so hysterical about what is, at the end of the day, just an industry realignment that will conceivably lead to improved tools, designed to better help filmmakers bring their stories to life. Now, these guys aren't serious filmmakers. I'd like to know what real industry leaders think. Call me when they buy Arri, perhaps? But it's not hard to find an answer to that since March 7. I didn't quote RED's press release in the last episode, but it pretty much echoed Nikon's, celebrating the deal as an opportunity for both companies to, quote, redefine the professional digital cinema camera market. But in more direct, not to mention candid terms, RED's president, Jared Land, he's been openly enthusiastic about the acquisition. Well, I mean, he's likely just made a lot of money. But even so, In a live interview with Scott Balcom, as Land exited the inking of the deal with Nikon in Japan, he said, and I quote, "The deal gave both companies exactly what they were lacking." I presume that he means Nikon gets a leg up in the cinema camera market, while RED gets Nikon's comparatively huge support infrastructure, production capabilities, financing, and a lot more. And Land has spoken very highly of Nikon, of its incredible heritage, and what he calls Nikon's fire to create the best imaging technology, which I think even he hadn't fully appreciated until he spent more time around the company during the inking of the deal. But I think he recognizes that fire is exactly the same energy that inspired him and founder Jim Jannard to build RED from the ground up, and the rest of the 220 employees involved. Those of us that have used the Z9, Z8, and ZF know how amazing the X-Speed 7 processor is, and so does Land. The ASIC that Nikon has built is extremely powerful, he said, intimating that much better autofocus will be one of the big improvements that could flow to RED cameras. Now, I know some people think camera operators aren't interested in autofocus. Certainly focus pullers, I can understand they'd be suspicious. But Land is impressed by the Z9 and Z8 cameras, and especially motion detect that came to the Z9, then more recently the Z8 and firmware updates. He really admires Nikon's continued firmware support, especially for those Z8 and Z9 cameras. He lavished praise on Nikkor lenses, which, let's not forget, have created some of the most beautiful images in cinema over time. And I can't wait for that Nikkor Cine line. It's coming. There. That's my prediction. As an aside, he also credited Minolta for the birth of autofocus, as I recently did. And he credits YouTube for creating a whole new audience and inspiring people to experiment with digital video. I guess that would include me. Now, Balcom also had Land on his podcast more recently, along with Keiji Oishi, the newly appointed CEO of RED Digital Cinema. Check out Balcom's channel. It's really great. Before I wrap this up, I want to thank the good people who took the time to comment on my last video on this subject and who specifically commented on the production values. Well, I do, whenever I have the time and energy, I try to bring quality to my productions on the set, so to speak, as well as in post-production. Understand, however, that's not always feasible for these YouTube videos, and I'll maybe address those issues in another video. But I did spend a bit more time than usual putting things together for these, and I'm glad it showed. So, again, if you'll hang in there, I'll show you around to give an idea of my setup here. First, the key light is the second dedicated video light I bought. This is a daylight balanced, well, supposed to be, I haven't measured it. It's an Aperture Amaran 100D Cob light. It's in one of my favorite modifiers, a folding 32-inch beauty dish from the Canadian company Strobe Pro that's supported right now by a Manfrotto wheel stand that I've had for 40 years this year. It's pretty much my around-the-house stand now, since it's relatively lightweight and easy to wheel around. The practicals are the house lights that we use on a daily basis, including the standard lamp and with shades made by Amanda's creative hands, at least 25 years ago. Still looking great. The bulbs are, I believe, 3200K, just your regular household LEDs. The wall sconces, fit for a castle, are fitted with bulbs that were in them when we moved in. Not sure of the temperature, but they're obviously very warm. I didn't use the main chandelier. It's too bright for the atmosphere that I was going for. And yes, it needs dusting. Anybody got a 14-foot ladder I can borrow? I turned on the lights in the china cabinet, but I didn't think that was quite enough, so I added one of my WeLight 8-watt K21 RGB tube lights, just using the CCT at 3200K. And finally, to approximate a fire in the fireplace, avoiding the fan noise that would kick in if I actually used it, I used the 18-watt Viltrox Sprite 15C, choosing the built-in fire effect. So that's it for the lighting. When it comes to audio, that's where I could improve the most. Because, as I've said before, if I'm not a filmmaker, I'm really no audio technician. And that's the understatement of the day. So quickly, Here's my setup and reasoning. I'm using a wireless system. The first video was the Kamika Boom XG Pro D2 with included lav mic and the Tascam DR60D Mark II recorder that I've had for actually 5 years this month. Now I'm using the recently acquired Rode Wireless Pro straight into camera. The reason that I choose the lav in this situation is, I've mentioned this before, the 18-foot ceilings in this living room. The reverb is insane, and a lav mic helps isolate the voice. I'm sitting here just at the intersection of the 9-foot ceilings in this dining area and the 18-foot echo chamber of the living room. If you're wearing headphones, no doubt you can still hear the echo, despite the lav and voice isolation that I'll apply in post. I've tried using my best mic, the Rode NT-G2 shotgun, and unless I get within a few inches of my mouth, the reverb it's still distracting. Now, you might be saying, why not use a podcast type mic? Well, I have one of those for voiceovers, but same thing. You have to get really close to your gob, and they sound great then. Even the relatively cheap Yeti mic that I have, and maybe this is just me, but I hate the trend of having those big fat mics as the main feature of a composition, often even obscuring the host's mouth. And people are always grabbing them, moving them around, and making noises and plosives, even when they have a screen. So that's not for me. When it comes to the most important gear used for these episodes, I'm using the cameras and lenses that I swear by. The Nikon Z8 I used for the last episode, and the Z9 this time around. Just one angle to keep things simple here because it's so long. Most of my videos are multi-angle, but I can get away with one angle, at least when I have all the room provided by 8K recording, now that I can crop and play with editing on a 4K timeline. In controlled lighting situations like this, I'm shooting 8K 10-bit SDR 24p. It's lovely to work with and gets appreciative comments. Oh, and I'm using a Tiffin quarter black Pro Mist filter on the Z50mm f1.8 lens. Love that lens, even though it could be merciless. I will say that what you see after YouTube compression is a far cry from how it looks before it's been crushed into that tiny space. It's sad really to see it after it's been through that torture. But what can you do? There's now, I notice, after processing, a significant amount of banding as a result, usually back here. All that lovely color information tossed into the digital trash can. Having said that, it's not the worst experience, watching these even on our 4K TV. I've seen worse actually on Netflix. So to wrap up, this is the place I'm coming from, basically a YouTube creator, albeit with a 4+ decade background as a stills photographer and a short stint as a journalist. Not from Hollywood or any kind of film studio perspective. So with that in mind, I suggest you avoid the purveyors of FUD and anger and tune into smaller channels and blogs hosted by people who actually are cinema insiders, people who have used RED extensively in the business of film production. You'll get a much more nuanced view of this acquisition and what it means for the future of RED, Nikon, and cinema camera systems in general. I notice Atomos, makers of recorders, monitors, and related video products like the Ninja series, and a company that has cooperated with both Nikon and RED, they've also responded enthusiastically to the news. Atomos CEO Jeremy Young commented, "I am particularly pleased for Nikon as they were one of the first companies to listen to us and go out of their way to give us a clean HDMI feed from their DSLRs, helping us to give birth to the Ninja monitor recorder. It is thanks to their belief and cooperation that Atomos has become the strong brand it is today." There you go. FUD-free commentary from another industry insider. Now, as of April 12th, 2024, we have an announcement from Nikon to the effect that it has successfully acquired 100% of the outstanding membership interests of RED.com LLC RED, which offers revolutionary digital cinema cameras and award-winning technologies, unquote. And that RED's president, Jared Land, became a close advisor to the company along with RED's founder James Janard. As I noted earlier, Keiji Oishi of Nikon's imaging business unit assumed the role of CEO, and Tommy Rios, executive vice president of RED, moved into the role of co-CEO. Onward and upward. I can't wait to see what this team has in store for RED, and who knows, maybe Nikon branded cameras too. So I hope you found this video informative and looking good, and hopefully not too long. Please do give it the old thumbs up if you did, and if this is your first visit to the channel, we'd love to see you again. Please do consider subscribing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting development. In the meantime, take care, cheers, we'll see you later.